French President Emmanuel Macron penned a piece in the Financial Times this week calling for immediate and coordinated action to rebalance economic relations between the EU and China after his state visit to China earlier this month. In response to his claims, the Chinese Commerce Ministry said on Thursday, China has always maintained that the essence of China-EU economic and trade relations is complementary advantages and mutual benefit. China-EU economic and trade cooperation is the result of a combination of factors, including the differences in their economic development stages and industrial structures, as well as changes in market demand. In other parts of the world, the Trump administration has put forward in a new national security strategy what it calls as Europe's cultural and economic decline. So what does President Macron's article in the Financial Times tell us about his take on China-EU ties today? What is the nature of China-EU economic and trade ties, really? How do China-EU and US-EU relations influence one another? Let's loop in our panelists. I'm so glad to be joined in Paris, Alexander Kateb, economist and founder of Multipolarity AI, in Berlin, Ulrich Bruckner, Jean Monnet Professor for European Studies with Stanford University, and in Shanghai, Jian Junbo, Director of the Center for China-Europe Relations with Fudan University. Gentlemen, what a pleasure to see all of you. Now, Mr. Jian, tell me more about China's reaction toward the latest article in the Financial Times put forward by the French President Emmanuel Macron, talking about what he called the rebalancing of relations with China.
The Chinese government response means that it doesn't agree that Macron's argument, because Macron said that if China didn't take some action, and the European Union or France will take some protectionist approach to against the Chinese goods imported into European Union. So I think anyway the protectionist approach is not reasonable. So I think the best way to deal with this issue is based on the bilateral negotiation, but not by the unilateral protectionist approach. So I think this is a good way. So I think this the Chinese government's opinion is reasonable.
Bruckner, tell me more about your thoughts on the latest response coming from China.
We live in times of a changing geo-economic situation, and we have to address the fact that we both suffer from difficult economic conditions. There are a number of problems in the European Union, and there are different problems on the Chinese side. And what we observe is a gigantic trade surplus on the Chinese side, which shows that there are imbalances. And we also see the 38 consecutive months of falling producer price index, which is a clear sign that there are structural problems of overproduction and a deflation problem. And with this giant surplus, China exports deflation to its trade partners, and a very prominent one is the European Union. So such things need to be addressed. This is not a hostile reaction by President Macron, but just a reminder that we need to do things that do not harm the other side.
If I can say, I don't agree that one reason of the imbalance between China and Europe, for example, is due to the overcapacity of production. Because, according to the theory of the so-called overcapacity of production, it means that one country produces too much that the people cannot consume totally. So, but if we look at the world, if I can see, because every country can take advantage to produce the goods, and if the world, in the level of the world, the goods is not so enough. So this is not a reason. If I have the time, I want to say there are some other reasons to explain the imbalance. So, for example, I think the basic reason is that China is the center of the manufacturing world. If we see the history, for example, in the beginning of the 20th century, the United States is the center of the manufacture in the world. In that time, the United States, of course, was the biggest trade partner of many countries in the world, and it had the surplus, So it has also the imbalance of trade with their trading partners, because the reason is it was the center of the manufacture. Because now, if we look at China, China is the center of the manufacture, and it produces, so many goods, but these goods, of course, consumed by the people in the world. So, of course, this is a natural development of the so-called division of labor, So this is, I think, the basic reason.
So, Professor Bruckner, go to you. Two things it seems that your Chinese counterpart was suggesting. One is that if United States in the early 1920s, 30s can be accepted as the largest exporters in the world, why cannot China be accepted as the largest exporter in the world? Are you using double standards when it comes to China? Secondly, is it more about competition, or is it more about using protective measures? Which will count for the future of Europe? Have you ever thought about that?
Well, there is nothing wrong with China being the world's manufacturer. That's not the question. And it's also clear that in the past, the United States have been in this position. So it's neither hostile, nor is it a question of the size of the balance, but we need to address the domestic problems both in the European Union and in China. And if Chinese companies produce losses, then it's on the expense of its trade partners, and in this case, it's the European Union. We should rather focus on shared foreign direct investment and not play a game in which it's a beggar my neighbor problem.
Mr. Jian from China, would you like to respond before I go to the other guest in the panel?
Yes, the Chinese goods are very cheap, but at the same time, the quality is very good. So it has a very, strong capability of competition with any, goods in the world. So, but the problem is that why the price is so low, but it's not about the so-called subsidy or some other government support for the enterprises. Some part of the reason is about subsidy, but the problem is that every country, including the European countries, also, have subsidies supported to the enterprise now. And I think for China, the goods, the price, the no price of the goods is about some other reasons. For example, the basic reason is a very perfect infrastructure.
Now go to you, Mr. Caleb.
I think all that has been said is true in some regard, but the devil is in the details, as we say. And regarding Europe, it has all the same advantages that China has, high quality infrastructure, very high education standards. The problem is that the European Union and European countries moved away from manufacturing decades ago because they thought that manufacturing was a declining sector, and they moved to services, especially financial services, while they did not invest enough in technology. I think this is the original sin of Europe. It's that it didn't invest enough in technology, and it did not leverage the size of its consumer markets, which is the second in the world after the United States, to build this strategic advantage, because it was more convenient to import those goods from other countries, first from Japan, Korea, and now from China. But this is the real problem, and this is something that will not go away like in 1 year or in 5 years. It will require tremendous new thinking and new execution capabilities at the EU level, at the member state level, to overturn this path toward decline and irrelevance. in which Europe is engaged right now, and which has not been corrected despite all the talks we hear from Macron and other leaders.
So do we see timetable with whether within the EU mechanism or from different capitals as to how to catch up on innovation and how to catch up on the manufacturing capabilities if it can? And what is likely to be the clear strategy?
Well, I think there are many issues that are on the policy side. First, the European market is not very well integrated. In China, you have one policy which applies to all the country. You have, of course, local variations of this policy and local leeway for officials. But in Europe, the market is still very much too fragmented. We see that in financial services, we see that in many areas, actually. And the bureaucracy and the laws and local laws are sometimes contradicting one another. And there has not been sufficient effort to remove these layers of bureaucracy and to kind of streamline the functioning of the internal market. So this is something that has to be done. Also, there is a need for more unified fiscal policy, I think, at the European level, which has lacked so far. Because in mature economies, you have two levels, the monetary policy and the fiscal policy. And if these two policies don't work together, then it is an imbalanced policy. We need this fiscal policy, which means borrowing at the European level rather than at the country state level, and using this money to invest massively in innovation, in infrastructure. That was the plan, actually, of former Italian Prime Minister Mario Draghi.
What does it take, Mr. Kattab, to address some of the earlier issues, for example, about innovation, about manufacturing capabilities, about the lack of independence in terms of security, which Washington keeps reminding their transatlantic partners over the past few months?
It takes more cohesion and political unity at the EU level, which we have not seen for some time, because there are diverging options, diverging views. I take the example of Germany, for example. It has pursued with some success its export-oriented model, leveraging its established industrial capabilities. And it kind of disregarded the other countries, the other European countries, in terms of their industrial potential, for example. This was good for Germany for some time, but now even Germany realizes that it is not enough. And we see that in the electric vehicle industry, in which German car makers now lag behind, and they push for this removal of deadlines on internal combustion engine, which is, I think, a wrong policy. This is a historical mistake that Europe will also pay one day. This idea to push for federal Europe, at least at the fiscal level, this is something that has to come and that has to be realized rather sooner than later, because we need that money, and that money cannot be raised at the state level, especially for some states like France, for example, or Italy, that are overburdened with debt and that has to finance also a very expensive welfare system. Anyway, I think there is a need to push for these common solutions. The Ukraine war, for all its damage, and loss, it has one positive impact. It pushed European leaders to realize that there was a need for this cohesion, and there was a need to move forward. And now we have to move also on the grassroots political level.
Based on the realities, how can China and Europe work together? From China's perspective, what can be the plan being developed? What are the common grounds which might work under the current circumstances? What suggestion would China and Beijing provides to their counterpart, including from the private sectors here in China?
It's two big, very big open markets or open economies. So the two sides should cooperate together to deal with the issues. So the best way for us is to work together. For example, the European enterprise can use the Chinese some goods like the solar panel, for example, use the batteries and use the AI instruments, and then we have the share goods we can compete in the said market.
Professor Jian is right to say that there needs to be more co-production, and the European market is one of the largest consumer markets, actually the second largest after the United States. So European policymakers should leverage this advantage.
Professor Bruckner?
We have a lot in common, and we can greatly benefit if we find pragmatic solutions in increasing foreign direct investment on both sides. The German Chamber of Commerce in China reports that those German companies that are already invested in China massively increase their joint ventures with Chinese companies to benefit from their cutting-edge technological innovations. And these are the roads that we should take, and rather accept the fact that we look at different economic and political systems, which makes it extremely difficult to compare what counts as a subsidy and what is a hidden subsidy and who provides free infrastructure. The European competition policy is something fundamentally different from what is in place in China, and therefore we compare the incomparable. So let's be pragmatic, and let's not try to simply redirect exports that cannot go to the United States anymore from China and flood the European market, because that would destroy the backbone of our industry. And then you do not have any consumption from Europe because our business model is at risk.
Well, the politicians are, particularly in Brussels, are trying to tightening up the interactions between the both sides. Business community, as Professor Bruckner suggested, are very happy to create more cooperation. And it seems that the wind are going in very different directions. How is China and Chinese businesses, especially private ones, interpret this?
Because now the European policymakers are always, are inclined to impose conditions or the political conditions on the Chinese markets. So the China-Europe, the business is seriously, influenced by the politics, especially from the European side. So I suggest that for the Chinese private enterprises, of course, they hope that they can invest in Europe, and they should not be always investigated by the European governments. Because now more and more investigations from the European side, are very common. So this is a very big challenge for the Chinese enterprises, especially for the Chinese private enterprises. We hope that the European governments can treat all the investment, all the enterprises in Europe equally, including the Chinese private enterprises.
So will investigating against the Chinese ones save time or buy time for the European industries to catch up? Will that practice work? Many suspect. Mr. Kattab?
There are two policies. There are two contradicting policies. One, which is more on the economic side, which favors bringing more Chinese investment to Europe. On the other hand, there are security considerations, and there are now some shifts in security policy. This is triggered also by the US, which pressures some European leaders to have a more thorough examination of Chinese investment. But you cannot have it both ways. you have to balance these security considerations with maintaining an investment-friendly climate. And I think this should be really emphasized at the policy level, because otherwise you will lose on both ends. You will lose on the security, and you will lose on the technology and investment attraction.
We have noticed in the national security strategy put forward by the current White House not long ago, there are specific areas in which it's been describing where is Europe and how they see Europe. U.S., according to it, reinforces U.S.-led geo-economic competition and castigates Europe's cultural and economic decline. The different attitude coming from Washington toward Europe or toward cross-Atlantic relations, how will that shape the discussion inside Europe about its relations with China, for example, whether it's in trade, economic, or about its relationship with the rest of the world?
The world has changed. The world has become multipolar, so to say. And I think this national security strategy, for the first time in the US, acknowledges this shift to multipolarity. Because if you read it carefully, there is one thing that is recognized, that the US should shift from global domination. And the way Europe is treated in this document is very telling, because it is treated like some kind of junior partner or some kind of historical background from which many US citizens come from. With which relations should be maintained and talent should be exploited, etc., but not as a power in this multipolar world. And this is something that should be worrying for the European leaders, and they should be beware of accepting at face value all US proposals, especially in relation to China, because at the end, if this shift really occurs, then the European Union has to shape its own independent policy and standing in the world, and it should not rely on the US. And especially when it comes to these, security-related issues, it should be very careful, in relation with China, for example, or with other countries.
Professor Buchner, the question really is whether Brussels, together with major capitals of the European continent, going to proactively shape its potential, or can only passively shape its future, even regarding its relations with China, only after Washington decides what to do and what to do with Europe?
Well, what we have learned during the year since President Trump came into office again is that we cannot count on the United States in practically everything. What you just quoted, the cultural decline of Europe, is a very talking example. Honestly, I'm very happy that I have the privilege to live in such a cultural decline, because it's the last part of the so-called Western world in which the virtues and the values of the Western world still count. So that means that we also have to de-risk from the United States, which opens a number of opportunities to be more pragmatic in finding common grounds with China or other parts of the world, which we didn't investigate in the past because we took for granted that transatlantic relations work well. So this is a strong signal, at least for the people who understand the changing geopolitical landscape. But as I said before, depending on who you talk to, the climate people can't wait to import competitive products from China, while the military people see a paranoia in which a Chinese car is not just a vehicle that drives you from A to B, but everything a Chinese car sees can also be seen in China, and that's considered to be a security risk.
From talking to acting, it is an issue about efficiency. So Professor Buchner, how do you see that efficiency now is to you, what is likely to be Europe's capability of dealing with the efficiency issue in the near future, given its urgency?
Well, Europe massively invests in a number of systemic sectors. It also diversifies its relations. It searches for pragmatic common ground with important partners like China, and it tries to de-risk from what used to be an asymmetric dependency, and that also includes the United States. This is the general direction, and it also addresses what Alexandre pointed out before, that there's a lot of homework that needs to be done domestically in the European single market.
All right. Well, I guess our time is up for today's discussion. This topic will be intensely debated in many capitals around the world, especially in Europe. Thank you so much for being with us for this round of discussion. Really appreciate it, all of you. Thank you.